Tonight, you step into a world where winter could kill an entire village, not with war, not with plague, but with empty shelves, long before refrigerators, supermarkets, or electricity. Medieval people survived by mastering smoke, salt, fire, and patience. In tonight's journey, you'll wander through smoky monasteries, frozen roads, crowded markets, and candlelit storehouses to discover how humans first learned to preserve meat and grain and quietly changed civilization forever. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these slow medieval journeys. Now, settle in, lower the lights, and let the fire crackle softly as we travel back into the cold. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself beneath the dripping stone arch of a medieval town gate, while evening mist creeps low across the muddy road and settles around your boots like cold breath from the earth itself. The guards above you lean on long spears with the weary posture of men who have spent all day smelling wet wool, horse sweat, and cabbage stew. Somewhere deeper in the town, bells ring from a monastery tower, soft and hollow through the fog. Marking an hour no one seems eager to count too carefully. Smoke drifts from crooked chimneys and clings beneath the rooftops, trapped under the damp autumn air. You can already feel straw sticking to your cloak, and you have not even found a place to sleep yet. A mule brushes past you carrying sacks of grain while its owner mutters that the roads are safer than last winter, which in medieval terms means only 3 robberies instead of 7. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You probably would not last a week out here without complaining about the smell alone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, comment your location and local time. It is always strangely comforting to know where fellow night travellers are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gate creaks shut behind you with the long groan of swollen oak and rusted hinges, and already the town feels sealed away from the dark countryside beyond. Torches sputter along the walls, their light trembling across puddles and wagon ruts. A dog with one torn ear watches you from beside a pile of damp rushes, then decides you're not important enough to bark at. Fair judgment. Honestly. You move deeper into the narrow streets where the smell changes every few steps. Wet hay, coal smoke, fish brine, human sweat, fresh bread, rotting turnips. Medieval towns do not believe in subtlety. Everything announces itself immediately and at great volume. Most of the houses lean inward over the lanes as though exhausted from centuries of standing. Upper stories nearly touch above your head, leaving only ribbons of darkening sky between them. Laundry hangs from ropes despite the damp weather, and somewhere above, unseen women shake crumbs from tablecloths directly into the street with remarkable confidence in gravity's ability to solve problems. You pass an alehouse glowing amber through horn-paned windows. Inside, men crowd shoulder to shoulder beside a smoky hearth, drinking weak ale from thick pottery cups. A fiddler scratches through a tune that may once have sounded cheerful several generations ago. Someone laughs hard enough to cough for a full minute afterward. Outside the alehouse door hangs a bunch of dried herbs tied with red thread. Some swear bundles like these keep sickness away from the threshold. Others say they only keep goats from chewing the walls. No one can quite agree whether the herbs truly work, but nearly every household hangs something beside its door all the same. You continue toward the market square, boots slipping on packed mud and scattered straw. The square itself lies mostly empty now except for a few merchants covering their stalls with waxed cloth. Yet traces of the day remain everywhere. Onion skins blow against wooden barrels. A cracked egg darkens the stones. Fish scales glitter silver beside the drain channel. Near the well stands a cart piled with coarse grey salt. 2 men guard it closely despite the late hour. Salt is worth watching. Salt means winter survival. Salt means pork that lasts beyond the slaughter month. Salt means fish edible after rivers freeze hard. A careless sack of salt might be mourned more sincerely than a troublesome cousin. The merchant notices you staring and rests a hand possessively atop one sack. "Good salt," he mutters, "northern coast," as though the salt itself had travelled nobly across kingdoms wearing a fur cloak. You nod politely anyway. Beyond the square rises the manor granary, taller than many homes and built from thick timber darkened by age. Iron bands reinforce the doors. Tiny slit windows sit high above the ground to keep damp air and thieves alike from entering too easily. Even now, 2 lanterns burn beside the entrance while a steward in a fur-lined cap checks wax tablets beneath the light. Grain receives better protection than many peasants. You slow near the granary wall and catch the warm, dusty smell drifting from within. Barley, rye, oats, humanity's old companions. The scent carries something deeply comforting beneath it, even here among mud and cold stone. It smells like tomorrow's bread already waiting in darkness. A pair of women pass carrying baskets covered in cloth. One basket releases the unmistakable scent of smoked eel. The other smells sharply of vinegar and cabbage. Preserved food surrounds this town the way mortar surrounds stone. You begin noticing it everywhere now. Strings of onions hanging beneath eaves, apples drying beside a baker's oven, herbs suspended from rafters, little clouds of smoke leaking from sheds near the river. Without preservation, winter would hollow places like this into graveyards. A church bell rings again, lower this time, followed by another farther away. Medieval towns live by bells the way sailors live by tides. Bells wake labourers, summon prayers, warn of fire, announce death, and occasionally remind everyone that some monk somewhere owns a very impressive rope. You follow the sound uphill through crooked lanes until the houses thin slightly near a small chapel. Beside its wall sits an old woman selling little beeswax candles from a tray balanced on her knees. Her fingers are stained yellow from wax and herbs. "Light one for St. Lawrence," she tells a passing couple. "He protects kitchens and cooks." The husband snorts softly. Then he has abandoned ours. The wife elbows him hard enough to nearly send him into a puddle. You buy no candle. But the old woman still touches 2 fingers to your sleeve and murmurs a blessing against spoiled meat. It is oddly specific, yet in this world, spoiled meat can kill faster than swords sometimes. Even now, it is hard to tell whether fear of hunger shapes these people more than fear of war. At the top of the rise stands the guest house attached to the monastery wall. Its wooden sign creaks in the wind. A painted loaf and fish decorate the board, faded nearly pale with age. Pilgrims, merchants, and wandering labourers shelter here for a few coins and whatever patience the monks can spare. Inside, warmth hits you first, not true warmth perhaps, but enough to soften frozen fingers. Smoke curls through soot-black rafters above long tables scarred by generations of knives. Rushes cover the floor, sweetened faintly with lavender to battle odours that lost the war many years ago. A novice monk brings you a bowl of pottage thick with barley and onions. Beside it rests a dark piece of coarse bread dense enough to repair castle walls. You eat slowly while rain begins tapping against the shutters. Around you, travellers speak quietly about harvests, about damp grain stores, about whether frost will come early. One merchant claims a village west of here lost half its winter pork because the salt arrived too late. Another insists smoked herring lasts longer if juniper branches burn beneath the racks. Those who tell the tale never fully agree why certain methods work best. They only trust what survived the previous winter. Near the hearth, an old man dries his boots while explaining that some households bury apples beneath straw and ash to preserve them through snow season. A younger traveller swears onions last longer if blessed on St. Martin's Day. No one argues very hard. In medieval life, superstition and practicality sit beside one another like old drinking companions. The tawny dog from the gate somehow appears beside your bench now, curling near the fire with the confidence of an animal that has stolen many suppers in its lifetime. Outside, the bells ring once more through rain and mist, and in the smoky warmth of the guest house, with barley on your tongue and wood smoke in your cloak, you begin to understand that the great struggle of this world is not glory, nor conquest, nor even faith alone. It is simply making food survive the winter. Morning arrives slowly beneath a ceiling of grey cloud and drifting chimney smoke. You wake on a straw mattress thin enough to maintain a close professional relationship with the wooden boards underneath. Nearby, someone snores with the stubborn rhythm of a blacksmith striking iron, while the tawny dog sleeps curled beside the dying hearth as though he personally owns the monastery guest house. A bell rings before dawn fully breaks, low and solemn through the damp air. Then another answers farther away across the town. The monks rise to prayer while most ordinary souls rise merely because medieval life refuses to allow comfortable sleeping hours. Cold greets you the moment your boots touch the floor. The novice monk from last night ladles weak ale into cups and passes around yesterday's bread toasted beside the coals. Hard bread rarely goes to waste here. Even stale crusts become soup thickener or trenchers beneath stew. A wealthy lord might enjoy fresh white loaves daily, but ordinary townsfolk respect bread the way sailors respect calm water, with gratitude and slight disbelief. Outside, mist hangs over the streets. Rainwater drips steadily from roofs into muddy gutters where chickens wander with suspicious confidence. A woman sweeps old rushes from her doorway, while muttering that wet weather spoils grain faster than thieves ever could. You follow the uphill lane toward the granary you noticed the previous evening. In daylight it looks even more imposing. Thick oak beams support its high walls, and iron straps bind the doors like armour. Tiny shuttered vents line the upper sides to let air move through without inviting birds, rats, or dampness inside. Grain is alive in its own way. It breathes, it sweats, it rots if neglected. And everyone here knows it. 2 labourers unload sacks from a wagon while a steward oversees them with the stern expression of a man who distrusts both weather and humanity equally. He wears a wool cloak trimmed with squirrel fur and keeps a heavy iron key hanging from his belt. That key could feed half the town by midwinter. You linger near the doorway as the steward checks each sack carefully. He plunges his hand into the grain, lifts a handful, smells it, then rubs kernels between thick fingers. Too damp, he mutters at one point. The wagon owner immediately begins swearing loyalty to every saint he can remember. Damp grain is dangerous. If stored wet, it heats inside the pile and moulds silently in darkness. Entire stores can spoil before winter's end. Some swear bad grain carries evil vapours that crawl into the lungs at night. Others simply note that mouldy bread makes people stagger strangely, and see visions that no priest can comfortably explain. Even now, it is hard to tell where medieval science ends and superstition begins. The steward notices your interest and gestures for you to stand aside before another wagon rattles past. Its wheels sink deep into mud despite fresh straw scattered over the street. Medieval road maintenance mostly consists of optimistic thinking. Workers carry sacks indoors on bent backs. You follow carefully behind one group and step into the granary itself. Warm dust and dry grain fill the air immediately. The scent feels strangely comforting, almost sleepy. Sunlight filters through narrow vents high above, catching floating chaff like pale gold drifting through shadow. Rows of bins stretch across the interior: barley, rye, oats, wheat for wealthier tables, peas stored in sacks, dried beans in barrels sealed against mice. Every corner of the building represents time stolen from hunger. The steward walks slowly between the stores while recording tallies on a wax tablet with a bone stylus. You lose grain 3 ways, he says to no one in particular: moisture, rats, and fools. Given medieval history, fools may actually rank first. Along one wall stand several cats watching the workers with cold professional focus. Monasteries and granaries prize good cats more than some noble courts prize musicians. A skilled mouser protects winter better than a dozen prayers. Though most people still say a cat sleeping near grain wards off evil spirits too. A labourer climbs a ladder carrying herbs tied in bundles. He hangs them from rafters above certain bins. Wormwood, another explainee, keeps pests away. No one can quite agree whether the smell truly deters insects or whether people simply feel calmer believing it does. Still, nearly every storage house uses herbs somewhere: lavender, wormwood, rosemary, mint. Medieval preservation often smells surprisingly pleasant once you move past the livestock. You wander deeper into the granary while workers continue their steady rhythm around you. Lift, carry, pour, record, repeat. Their motions feel almost ceremonial. Outside these walls, autumn slowly strips leaves from trees and shortens daylight day by day. Inside, human beings attempt the oldest bargain imaginable, persuading food to remain food long enough to survive winter. Near the rear of the building, you find an older woman kneeling beside several open sacks. She sorts grain carefully by hand, removing dark kernels and bits of mould before they contaminate the rest. You learn the smell, she tells you quietly. Good grain smells warm. Sick grain smells sweet. She wrinkles her nose. Sweet means trouble. Her hands move constantly as she speaks. Years of labour have bent her fingers crooked and shiny with swollen joints. Yet she works with astonishing speed. You ask whether the stores usually last through winter. She snorts softly. Depends who counts them. Fair answer. Some winters pass gently enough. Others linger cruelly into spring while grain bins empty lower and lower. Then people grind acorns into flour. They stretch pottage thin as rainwater. They sell cloaks for rye. They pray more sincerely. A bell rings again outside, marking another hour. The old woman crosses herself automatically. St. Benedict guard the stores, she murmurs. You leave the granary near midday and step back into cool air smelling of smoke and wet earth. The market square has awakened fully now. Bakers sell coarse loaves from wicker baskets, while children chase one another around carts loaded with cabbages and onions. A butcher's stall displays strips of salted pork hanging from hooks beneath linen cloths to keep flies away. Nearby, smoked fish dark as polished wood lie stacked beside barrels of brine. Preservation fills every stall, drying, smoking, salting, pickling. Humanity has built entire towns upon the stubborn refusal to let food disappear too quickly. You buy a piece of hard cheese and a heel of rye bread before settling near the well. The Tournier dog appears almost immediately, proving once again that medieval dogs understand food economics perfectly. Nearby, 2 merchants argue loudly over grain measures. He shorted me a quarter sack. You cannot count. My wife counts better than you. That is not the insult you think it is. Their quarrel draws little attention. Markets thrive on noise the way monasteries thrive on silence. Across the square, a young priest blesses several sacks before transport. Some traders insist blessed grain resists spoilage longer, others merely appreciate any help available. Clouds drift low overhead, heavy with more rain perhaps. Smoke rises from cook fires. Bells echo faintly. Somewhere beyond the walls, fields already stand half-harvested beneath autumn wind. And through it all, you begin seeing the town differently now, not simply as streets and stone and muddy boots, but as one enormous machine built carefully against starvation. Every iron key, every sack, every handful of salt, every hanging herb, every anxious glance toward the sky, all of it exists because winter is always coming, and medieval people know better than anyone that survival belongs not merely to those who grow food, but to those who learn how to keep it. The rain finally arrives sometime after midday, soft at first, then steady enough to turn the market square into a broad mirror of mud and rippling puddles. Merchants curse quietly while pulling waxed cloth over their stalls. A boy carrying onions slips beside the well and lands so completely inside a puddle that even the Tourneur dog looks embarrassed for him. You pull your cloak tighter and follow the scent of warm bread drifting through the wet streets. It leads you down a narrow lane where ovens breathe heat through half-open shutters and flour dust floats pale in the air like winter mist. Here the bakers work from before dawn until long after dusk, turning the grain protected in the granary into the one food nearly every person in town depends upon. The bakery itself glows gold against the grey afternoon. Inside, the warmth wraps around you instantly. Smoke-black beams hang low overhead, and the stone floor carries a permanent layer of flour despite constant sweeping. Sacks of rye lean against the wall beside bins of barley meal. A pair of apprentices knead dough with exhausted determination, while a woman near the oven shapes loaves using hands thickened by years of heat and labour. The smell alone nearly feels nourishing. Warm yeast, toasted crust, ashwood smoke. One old baker notices you watching and grunts toward a bench. "Stay out of the doorway unless you wish freezing rain in your bread." A perfectly reasonable boundary. You sit quietly while the bakery moves around you in practiced rhythm. Dough folds, wooden peels scrape, ovens crackle softly. Outside, rain taps against shutters in a sleepy, endless pattern. Bread in this world is not simply food, it is certainty, or the closest thing medieval people ever managed to achieve. Fresh loaves cool on rough wooden boards nearby. Most are dark and dense, made from rye or barley rather than expensive white wheat. Peasants often eat bread so coarse it contains bits of husk, ground peas, or even chestnut flour during lean years. Some travellers joke that village bread can survive longer than castle walls. Judging by the weight of one loaf set beside you, they may not be exaggerating. The baker's wife slices stale bread into a pot simmering above the fire. Nothing is wasted. Old bread thickens soup, feeds animals, or becomes trenchers beneath meat and stew. Even crumbs are gathered carefully. Hunger taught people thrift long before sermons ever did. One apprentice wipes sweat from his forehead with a flour-covered arm and mutters that the grain this season feels damp. "Storm's too early," he says. The old baker nods grimly. "Need hotter ovens to drive the wet out." That is part of preservation too. Grain must remain dry. Flour must remain dry. Bread itself often lasts longer if baked hard enough to force moisture away. Some households intentionally make small hard loaves for travel and winter storage, soaking them later in broth or ale when teeth alone prove insufficient. A monk enters carrying a basket lined with cloth. The room quiets slightly. Monasteries buy bread regularly, especially before feast days or pilgrim seasons. The monk inspects several loaves carefully before choosing 6. Abbot says less salt this time, he tells the baker. The baker raises an eyebrow. Then the abbot can explain that decision to the fish seller come winter. The monk sighs the sigh of a man deeply familiar with administrative suffering. Even monasteries argue constantly over food stores, perhaps especially monasteries. You warm your hands near the oven while rain darkens the town outside. Through the open rear door you glimpse racks where flat rounds of bread cool beneath linen covers. Nearby hangs garlic braided together beside bunches of rosemary and sage. Some swear rosemary keeps mould away from stored bread. Others claim it merely disguises unpleasant smells. No one can quite agree whether medieval households preserve food through wisdom, luck, or stubborn optimism. Probably all 3. A child arrives carrying a little clay token stamped with the manor seal. The baker exchanges it for a loaf and half a smaller roll. Bread tokens are common here, especially during hard seasons when coin grows scarce. Grain itself becomes currency in all but name. The child leaves hugging the loaf against her chest like treasure. And honestly, it is. The old baker eventually hands you a small piece of fresh rye loaf still warm from the oven. Steam escapes when you break it apart. The crust cracks softly beneath your fingers. Simple bread tastes different in cold weather. Better somehow. More necessary. Outside, bells ring the afternoon office from the monastery tower. Their sound drifts through rain and chimney smoke, slow and heavy across the rooftops. The baker's wife crosses herself automatically before checking another oven. "You hear bells," she says quietly, "and you remember time still moves." An oddly comforting thought in a world ruled so completely by seasons and weather. As afternoon deepens, more townsfolk crowd into the bakery seeking warmth as much as bread. Cloaks drip rainwater onto the rush-covered floor. Conversation rises and falls in sleepy murmurs. A carter complains about rats getting into grain sacks near the south wall. A woman mutters that hanging iron nails above storage bins frightens vermin away. Another insists cats work better than nails. The first woman shrugs. Use both. Rats fear nothing. Fair again. Near dusk, the rain finally softens. You leave the bakery carrying a rough chunk of bread wrapped in cloth. The streets shine black beneath torchlight now, and smoke hangs low enough to sting your eyes. You wander toward the poorer edge of town where labourers live close beside the outer wall. Here houses shrink smaller, roofs sag lower, and preservation becomes even more important. Wealthier folk may survive spoiled stores by buying replacements. Poor families rarely receive such luxuries from fate. Outside one cottage, strips of turnip dry beneath the eaves despite the damp weather. Another family has apples spread on woven trays near the hearth inside their doorway. You glimpse onions hanging from rafters and herbs tied beside smoke-black chimneys. A woman sitting near one threshold peels thin slices from a cabbage, while telling 2 children not to waste the outer leaves because they can still flavour broth. You think saints grew food from miracles, she asks them. No, saints understood leftovers. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs tiredly. Further along, you pass a tiny courtyard where an old man repairs a grain sieve by lantern light. His fingers move carefully through the wire mesh while a kettle steams beside him. Bad sieve ruins flour, he mutters without looking up. Every object here matters, every tool, every scrap of storage knowledge. Medieval survival depends upon thousands of quiet habits repeated correctly year after year. At the far edge of the district stands a communal oven no longer burning tonight. Beside it hangs a small painted image of Saint Honoratus, patron of bakers. Wax drips down the frame from little offerings left beneath it. Some swear bread blessed on certain feast days never moulds as quickly. Others say holy bread simply disappears faster because everyone eats it first. The tawny dog catches up with you again near the wall, shaking rainwater from his coat before trotting ahead importantly as though guiding your journey. Beyond the battlements, darkness spreads across soaked fields where harvested grain once stood under summer sun. Now stubble bends beneath cold wind. Winter waits patiently beyond the horizon. You pause beneath a torch bracket while chewing the last of the warm rye bread, and all at once the town feels strangely fragile. Not because of armies or plague or fire, but because every loaf cooling in every bakery tonight represents months of labour balanced against weather, mould, rats, dampness, and time itself. Human beings learned long ago that growing grain was only half the battle. The other half, the quieter half, was learning how to make harvest linger. By the next morning the rain has passed, though the town still glistens beneath a pale sky the colour of old wool. Water drips steadily from rooftops into the gutters, and the streets smell richly of mud, chimney soot, horse dung, and damp straw. Medieval towns possess an astonishing ability to become simultaneously filthy and comforting at the same time. You wake stiff beneath your wool blanket in the monastery guest house while bells ring the first hour after dawn. The tawny dog has somehow upgraded his sleeping arrangements and now occupies the warmest place beside the hearth with the self-assurance of minor nobility. A novice monk hands you oat porridge flavoured faintly with honey and dried apples. "From last autumn's stores," he says proudly. The apples themselves have gone leathery with age, but when simmered in the porridge they soften into sweetness again. Preservation rarely aims for perfection. Survival is usually enough. Outside, the market already hums with movement. Today traders from nearby villages have arrived before sunrise, their carts creaking beneath sacks, barrels, cages, and bundles tied against the cold. Wheels grind through rutted mud while merchants shout greetings that sound only slightly less suspicious than threats. You follow the growing noise toward the square. The market smells different this morning, sharper somehow, brighter. Salt and vinegar ride the air alongside smoke and livestock. Preservation has come openly into the streets today. Near the centre of the square stand 3 large wagons surrounded by townsfolk. Each carries heavy sacks of coarse grey salt stacked beneath canvas coverings. The merchants guarding them look perpetually anxious, which is understandable. Salt travels poorly through muddy roads and poorly through desperate regions. Men have been robbed for less valuable cargo than flavouring rocks. One merchant notices you examining the sacks and pats one affectionately. "Sea salt," he says, "worth more than lazy sons." His companion shrugs. "Depends on the sun. Reasonable distinction. Salt shapes nearly every preserved food in this world. Without it, pork rots, fish spoils, butter turns foul. Even some cheeses fail. Entire economies rise around mining, transporting, taxing, and guarding salt. Kings fight over it. Monasteries count it carefully. Villagers sometimes hide little stores beneath floorboards like treasure. You watch a butcher bargaining hard for several sacks while nearby women inspect smaller quantities wrapped in cloth. One tests the grains between finger and thumb as carefully as a jeweller studying gemstones. The butcher finally pays with coin, cured hides, and what appears to be one extremely reluctant goose. Trade negotiations here possess a wonderfully chaotic energy. Beside the salt merchants stand coopers displaying fresh barrels. Oak barrels line the stall in neat rows bound with iron hoops blackened from the forge. A good barrel preserves food almost as effectively as a fortress preserves soldiers. Pickled cabbage, salt pork, ale, dried peas, vinegar fish, Everything eventually ends up inside wood. The cooper himself knocks proudly on one barrel. "Tight seal," he announces, "no leaks." A passing fisherman snorts. "That is what you said last winter." The cooper pretends sudden interest in rearranging lids. You wander farther through the market while the square fills steadily with noise and smoke. Fishmongers display smoked eels hanging from poles dark as polished leather. Nearby, another stall sells salted herring packed tightly in brine barrels. The smell is impressive. Not necessarily pleasant, just powerful enough to feel historical. A woman cuts samples from cured pork while explaining proudly that juniper smoke gives better flavour than oak alone. Another customer insists applewood preserves meat longer. Those who tell the tale never fully agree about the best methods. Every village believes its own smokehouse superior. Every household guards tiny preservation secrets as they were royal treaties. Near the fountain stands an elderly spice seller wrapped in layers of faded wool. Tiny cloth packets cover her table mustard seed, fennel, cloves, pepper, dried sage, and little cones of precious saffron worth more than many labourers earn in months. Spices matter partly for flavour, certainly, but also because preserved food grows repetitive through winter. Salted meat tastes better with herbs. Vinegar cabbage becomes bearable with mustard. Dried peas improve enormously when someone remembers rosemary exists. The spice seller lifts a finger toward you. Cloves keep sickness away from bad air. A nearby man mutters, or simply make the air smell less terrible. Again, probably both. You pause beside a fish stall where smoked river trout hang above slow-burning charcoal braziers to keep flies distant. The fisherman explains that fresh fish spoils frighteningly fast unless gutted immediately, and either salted or smoked before sunset. River gives food, he says, but river also takes lazy men. His hands move constantly as he talks, rubbing salt into another fish with practice speed. Behind the stalls rises the toll house where town officials collect market fees from traders entering the gates. A line of frustrated merchants stretches beside it, while clerks scratch records onto parchment with ink-stained fingers. Taxes reach even preserved onions eventually. One wagon driver argues loudly that his cabbage barrels should count as vegetables rather than trade goods. The clerk blinks at him. "You are selling them." "Yes, but humbly." The clerk remains unconvinced. You drift away before the discussion develops into theological territory. At the edge of the square, several village women gather around a communal brining trough. They lower cabbage heads into salted water weighted with smooth stones. Nearby children carry bundles of dill and garlic for flavouring. Pickling feels almost magical when watched closely. Fresh vegetables lowered into salt and water somehow survive months beyond their natural life. No wonder medieval people often speak of preservation with half-superstitious respect. Some swear moon phases affect brining, others insist storms spoil pickles faster. One old woman mutters that angry people should never prepare winter cabbage because bitterness enters the barrel itself. Hard to disprove, honestly. The air grows colder as clouds drift overhead again. A wind rattles hanging signs and carries chimney smoke across the square in pale ribbons. You notice now how deeply preservation shapes daily movement here. Salt traders guarded like nobles, barrel makers working without rest, fish smoked before dawn, herbs bundled beneath market awnings. Every craft bends toward winter survival. Even the church participates. A priest passes through the crowd, blessing a wagon loaded with grain sacks destined for nearby villages. The driver kisses a wooden saint medal hanging from his neck before climbing back onto the cart. No one laughs. When weather, rot, and hunger threaten constantly, people accept help from heaven wherever available. You buy a small wedge of smoked cheese wrapped in cloth and move toward the edge of the market where smoke drifts thickest near the river road. Ahead, beyond clustered warehouses and woodpiles, long thin streams of grey smoke rise steadily into the cold air. Smokehouses. The scent reaches you even from here. Wood smoke, fish oil, salt, and slow heat blending together into something ancient and strangely comforting. The tawny dog trots ahead once more, pausing beside a puddle to drink before continuing importantly toward the riverside district. Bells ring noon behind you while merchants continue shouting across the square. And as you leave the market behind, stepping toward the smoke curling over the riverbank, you begin understanding something quietly remarkable. Human beings did not merely learn to store food, they built entire towns, trades, rituals, arguments, superstitions, and livelihoods around the stubborn hope that tomorrow's hunger might already be waiting safely inside a barrel, beneath a layer of salt, or hanging patiently above smoke. The riverside district lies lower than the rest of the town, where damp air settles heavily among warehouses, docks, and crooked sheds blackened by decades of smoke. Mud sucks at your boots as you follow the narrow lane downhill beside stacks of firewood and coils of wet rope. The river itself moves slowly beyond the buildings, grey beneath the clouded sky, carrying reeds, driftwood, and the occasional unfortunate smell from upstream villages. Here the town sounds different. Less shouting, has more creaking wood, sloshing water, chopping axes, and the distant hiss of damp logs catching fire. The smokehouses stand near the water's edge where fishermen unload catches directly from boats before spoilage begins its quiet work. Long wooden buildings lean beneath low roofs patched with tar and moss. Thin streams of smoke curl constantly from roof vents into the cold afternoon air. You smell them before reaching the doors. Oak smoke, juniper, fish oil, salt, fat dripping onto embers somewhere deep inside. A fisherman passing with baskets of river trout nods toward one of the sheds. Best smokehouse in town, he says. Then, after a pause, second best if you ask my brother. Family loyalty has limits, apparently. You duck through the low doorway into warmth thick with haze. Smoke hangs beneath the rafters in pale, drifting layers that sting your eyes slightly, but settle into your cloak with surprising comfort. Rows of fish hang from wooden racks overhead, darkening slowly above low-burning fires. Strips of pork sway gently nearby. Hooks creak softly whenever the wind rattles the building. The entire place feels suspended between kitchen and chapel. A broad-shouldered woman tends the fires near the centre pit. Her apron shines with grease, and her sleeves smell permanently of smoke. "Mind your head," she warns as you enter, "and mind the dog. He steals eel." The torn-ear dog, already inside somehow, looks briefly offended by this unfairly accurate accusation. You step carefully between the hanging rows while workers prepare fresh catches at long tables beside the wall. Fish are gutted with astonishing speed, rubbed heavily with salt, then hung from hooks to dry slightly before smoking begins. Everything moves quickly because it must. Fresh fish spoils almost immediately if neglected. Medieval people know this intimately. Entire villages can sicken from careless handling. So fishermen salt their catch aboard boats when possible, while smokehouses work from dawn until deep night during busy seasons. The woman near the fire tosses juniper branches onto the coals. Sweet, sharp fragrance rises instantly through the smoke. Juniper keeps flies away, she says, and gives better flavour. A younger worker mutters, or just hides river taste. She throws a rag at him without turning around. No one can quite agree whether smoke preserves mainly through heat, dryness, or some invisible quality hidden inside certain woods. Most people only know that smoked food survives longer, especially through damp weather when ordinary storage fails. You stand beneath hanging trout darkening slowly to bronze above the fire. Thin ribbons of fat drip occasionally onto embers below with soft hissing sounds. The rhythm here feels strangely calming. Turn fish, feed fire, check smoke, wait. Human beings spent thousands of years learning patience from food. At one side of the building rests a row of barrels packed with coarse salt. Beside them hang bundles of herbs and garlic braided together with red cord. Against spoilage, you ask. The smokehouse woman shrugs. Against spoilage, against bad luck, against spirits who envy full cupboards. Depends who you ask. Fair enough again. A narrow staircase leads upward to loft storage beneath the roof beams. You climb carefully while smoke curls around you in shifting grey layers. Above, the air grows warmer and drier. Here older smoked meats hang curing slowly in darkness. Pork bellies, sausages, strips of venison from autumn hunts. The smell is rich enough to make you instantly hungry, despite already eating this morning. A man kneeling beside one rack examines a row of sausages carefully for mould. He wipes each casing with vinegar using a wool cloth. White mould good, he murmurs. Green mould bad. An elegantly simple scientific system. He explains that some meats cure for weeks before proper storage. Others dry faster beside stronger smoke. The weather changes everything. Damp air slows curing. Cold helps. Warmth ruins. Winter preserves better than summer, he says quietly. Cold is half the craft. Below you, the fires crackle softly while river wind rattles the walls. Through a loft slit you glimpse the docks outside where fishermen unload another boat. Their cloaks flap sharply in the rising wind. Clouds move lower overhead now, darkening the river until water and sky nearly match. The man beside the sausages suddenly touches a little iron charm hanging near the rafters. Old habit. He says when he notices your glance, a smother swore iron frightens rot away. Some swear nails driven above smokehouse doors keep demons from souring meat. Others hang horseshoes. Others carve crosses into barrel lids. Medieval preservation involves an extraordinary amount of arguing with invisible forces. And honestly, if your family's survival depended on a few hanging pork strips lasting until February, you might become slightly superstitious too. You descend again into the main room where workers now share a simple meal near the fire pit. Coarse bread, smoked eel, weak ale, onion pottage simmering in an iron pot blackened with soot. One fisherman offers you a strip of smoked trout still warm from the rack. The flavour arrives slowly, salt first, then smoke, then rich oil beneath it all. Food like this carries winter inside it already. Conversation drifts lazily around the fire while outside the afternoon darkens earlier than it should. Autumn shortens daylight week by week, reminding everyone that preservation work cannot wait forever. One worker tells a story about a neighbouring village whose smokehouse burned last winter. They lost half their stores, he says quietly. The others fall briefly silent. Fire destroys preserved food terrifyingly fast. A single spark can erase months of labour. That is why many smokehouses keep St. Charms above doorways and water barrels nearby. Faith and caution travel together here. Near the doorway hangs a dried pike jaw tied with twine. For luck you ask. The smokehouse woman snorts. For gulls, birds see it and stay back. Then she pauses. Though my grandmother claimed river spirits feared fish bones too, those who tell the tale never fully agree where practicality ends and folklore begins. Outside, evening settles over the riverbank. Lanterns flicker alive one by one along the docks, while mist creeps low across the water. Smoke drifts from every chimney in slow blue-grey ribbons. You step from the warmth of the smokehouse into the chill air, carrying the scent of cured fish deep in your cloak. Behind you, fires continue burning patiently beneath hanging meat and darkening trout. The work will continue all night, because hunger never truly sleeps in this world. And down here beside the river, among smoke-black rafters and salted hands, human beings have learned perhaps the oldest survival lesson of all, that time itself can be slowed, if only a little, with fire, salt, and care. By the time you climb back toward the monastery district, evening has already begun folding itself across the town. Mist gathers low in the lanes again, softening torchlight into trembling halos. Chimneys breathe smoke into the darkening sky while bells echo faintly over the rooftops, calling monks toward prayer and reminding everyone else how quickly daylight disappears this time of year. Your cloak now smells thoroughly of smokehouse fires. Honestly, it may never recover. The Tawnir dog trots beside you through puddles and scattered straw, occasionally stopping to inspect mysterious corners with the concentration of a scholar examining sacred texts. Somewhere ahead, a cartwheel creaks miserably against wet stone while a driver mutters curses severe enough to alarm nearby chickens. The monastery gates stand half open beneath lantern light. Beyond them lies a quieter world of stone paths, herb gardens, covered walkways, and soot-dark buildings clustered around the abbey church. The noise of the town fades quickly once you step inside. Here footsteps soften, voices lower automatically. Even the wind seems to move more carefully. A novice leads you toward the guest house again, though tonight the monks have invited several travellers to share supper in the refectory itself. Pilgrims sit beside merchants and labourers at long wooden tables polished smooth by centuries of sleeves and elbows. Candles burn low in iron holders, their beeswax scent mixing with stew and damp wool. The meal arrives slowly but steadily. Thick barley pottage, dark bread, pickled cabbage sharp with vinegar, smoked fish from the riverside sheds, hard cheese softened slightly near the fire. Nothing extravagant. Everything preserved. The monks eat quietly while one elderly brother reads aloud from a Latin manuscript near the hearth. Most listeners understand little of the words, yet the sound itself comforts them. Medieval life contains many things people pretend to understand because admitting confusion feels impolite. You sit near a thin monk with ink stains permanently darkening his fingertips. He notices your interest in the meal and gestures toward the cellar stairs beneath the hall. Abbey stores, he says softly. Without them, half the valley starves by Candlemas. Monasteries preserve more than scripture. They preserve food, seeds, brewing methods, herb knowledge, and practical skills gathered slowly across generations. In hard winters, abbey granaries sometimes matter more to villagers than noble courts do. The monk tears bread carefully while speaking. People think monks spend all day praying. You glance toward the cellar. He shrugs. We also spend a shocking amount of time worrying about cabbages. A deeply human revelation. After supper, several brothers descend into the storage cellars carrying lanterns, and you follow quietly behind. Stone steps curve downward beneath the abbey into cool darkness smelling of earth, wax, and dried herbs. The cellar stretches wider than expected beneath vaulted ceilings blackened slightly by centuries of lantern smoke. Shelves line the walls, barrels stand in ordered rows. Strings of onions hang from beams overhead beside garlic and bundles of thyme. Preservation lives underground here. A younger monk checks wheels of cheese resting on wooden boards, turning each carefully by hand. Another scrapes mould from the outer rind of a barrel using a curved knife. Good mould, you ask? Depends on the smell. Again, Medieval food safety proves wonderfully straightforward. Farther along stand huge crocks filled with pickled vegetables sealed beneath cloth and wax. Nearby, sacks of dried peas and beans rest atop wooden pallets to keep them away from damp stone floors. The ink-stained monk explains that monastery rules often require careful accounting of every stored item. How many fish salted, how much ale brewed, which herbs dried well, which grain spoiled. He smiles faintly. God notices detail, so do hungry peasants. At the rear of the cellar lies the coolest chamber where smoked meats hang from hooks in near darkness. Pork bellies sway gently whenever someone passes carrying a lantern. Sausages dry slowly beside strips of venison donated by local nobles during autumn hunts. A brother tending the room burns rosemary in a shallow clay bowl. For the smell, you ask? For the air, he answers. Bad air brings corruption. Some swear rosemary purifies cellars. Others believe sage keeps rats distant. One monk quietly claims St. Benedict himself once protected an abbey granary from worms after a prayer service. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the miracle truly happened or whether the grain simply dried properly that season. The cellar remains cool enough that your breath briefly fogs in the lantern light. You begin noticing how carefully monasteries manage time itself. Bells wake prayer, bells mark labour, bells announce meals, brewing, drying, turning cheese, airing blankets, checking stores. Medieval monasteries run partly on devotion and partly on schedules obsessive enough to frighten modern office clerks. Near one shelf sits a row of clay jars sealed with wax. Medicinal syrup, so the monk explains. Honey preserves herbs well. Inside the jars rest elderberry, mint, garlic steeped in vinegar, and bitter mixtures meant to soothe coughs or fevers. Medieval medicine trusts preservation too. Honey, wine, salt, vinegar. Drying all help keep remedies usable through winter. Though admittedly some remedies sound suspiciously like punishments. One jar contains onions soaked in ale and herbs. For chest sickness, says the monk. You suspect the sickness might prefer remaining untreated. A bell rings overhead, muffled through layers of stone, Compline, final prayers before sleep. The monks begin extinguishing lanterns one by one as you climb back upstairs. Darkness settles quickly behind you in the cellar, swallowing rows of barrels and hanging meats into silence again. Outside in the cloister courtyard, cold air carries the scent of rain-soaked stone and distant chimney smoke. Moonlight barely filters through clouds overhead. Somewhere beyond the abbey wall, town life still mutters faintly in taverns and kitchens. A monk pauses beside the herb garden before retiring indoors. Frost silvers the edges of sage leaves already. Winter comes early sometimes, he murmurs. Then he adds, almost absent-mindedly, people think hunger arrives suddenly. It does not. It arrives one spoiled barrel at a time. The words linger with you afterward. Back in the guest house, travellers settle beneath blankets while the hearth burns low. The Tourneur dog circles twice before collapsing beside your bench with dramatic exhaustion, despite contributing almost nothing practical all day. Rain begins again softly outside. You lie awake a while listening to the monastery breathing around you. Bells no longer ring now, only distant footsteps, wind against shutters, crackling embers, a faint mouse somewhere in the walls conducting its own nightly grain inspection. The world beyond the abbey remains cold and uncertain. Roads drown in mud, harvests fail, meat spoils, grain moulds, winter stretches longer than expected. Yet beneath monasteries like this one, in cool cellars lit by beeswax candles and guarded by careful hands, human beings keep pushing back against that uncertainty little by little. A barrel sealed properly, a cheese turned at the right hour, a cabbage lowered into brine before frost. Simple acts, quiet acts. But enough quiet acts together can carry an entire town through winter darkness. And somewhere below your sleeping floorboards tonight, preserved food waits patiently in the cool earth, holding back hunger one jar, one sack, one hanging strip of smoked meat at a time. Several days pass beneath low skies, and drifting smoke before the town reaches the season everyone quietly anticipates and quietly dreads at the same time. Slaughter season. You notice the signs early in the morning, fires already burning before dawn, knives being sharpened outside workshops, extra barrels rolled into courtyards, salt sacks carried through the streets under careful guard. Even the bells sound different somehow in the cold air, harder and more metallic. Winter waits close now, and winter must be fed. You leave the monastery after a breakfast of oat bread and weak ale while frost still clings silver to the edges of puddles. Your breath drifts pale before you as you walk downhill through streets alive with purposeful movement. Women carry tubs, men haul wood. Children run errands wrapped in cloaks too large for them. The Tournier dog follows closely today with unusual optimism. A troubling development. Near the outer wall, beyond the market square, smoke rises from several open yards where butchers and farmers work together before the cold fully deepens. Animals cannot be fed through winter easily. Most households keep only breeding stock alive until spring. The rest becomes salted meat, smoked sausage, rendered fat, preserved blood pudding, dried strips hanging in rafters. Nothing wastes here. Nothing can afford to. You enter one muddy courtyard where workers move steadily beneath hanging lanterns despite the weak morning sun. Pigs squeal somewhere behind a fence while women scrub barrels nearby with boiling water and herbs. The smell arrives immediately. Wood smoke, blood, salt, wet straw, vinegar. Not pleasant perhaps, but strangely honest. A butcher wearing a heavy leather apron sharpens a blade beside the chopping block. Steam rises from buckets of hot water near his boots. "Cold day's best," he mutters. "Meat keeps better." Several villagers stand nearby rubbing salt into thick cuts of pork laid across wooden tables. Their hands move briskly despite numb fingers. Preservation begins almost immediately after slaughter. Delay means spoilage. Spoilage means hunger later. One older woman overseeing the salting process notices you watching. "More salt there," she snaps at a younger man. You preserve meat like you are apologizing to it. The younger man obediently adds another handful. Around the yard hang rows of cleaned intestines prepared for sausage casings. Nearby, iron pots simmer with rendered fat that will later become cooking grease, lamp fuel, or sealing wax for storage jars. Even bones matter and broth, tools, needles, handles. Medieval people treat animals with a practicality so complete it almost feels sacred. A pair of children carry bundles of sage and garlic toward a work table while whispering nervously. Some families believe certain herbs protect meat from corruption during curing. Others claim garlic discourages evil spirits wandering close during slaughter season. No one can quite agree whether spirits truly care about sausages. Still, the garlic hangs everywhere. At the far side of the yard, several men pack chunks of pork into large barrels layered carefully with coarse salt. Each layer disappears beneath white crystals before another is added above it. One man presses the meat down firmly. "Air ruins everything," he says. Then after a pause, same with gossip. Wisdom appears in unexpected forms today. You wander farther through the courtyard while crows gather hopefully along nearby rooftops. Smoke from little fires drifts across the scene in soft grey ribbons. The work itself feels oddly calm despite its grim necessity. No shouting, no panic, just labour repeated season after season for generations. Cut, salt, hang, seal, store. Human survival reduced to rhythm again. Near a shed wall hangs a row of sausages already drying above slow charcoal braziers. Their skins shine darkly in the smoke. A young woman turns them carefully using a wooden rod. If they dry too fast, they crack, she explains. If too slow, mould. Simple enough. Though even mould becomes complicated here. Certain white moulds are tolerated and green moulds scraped away if caught early. Black mould feared completely. Medieval food preservation involves an astonishing amount of staring suspiciously at surfaces. Nearby, a grandmotherly woman prepares blood sausage in steaming pots while lecturing anyone within hearing distance. Always stir clockwise, she insists. Counterclockwise brings bad keeping. A younger helper rolls her eyes discreetly. The older woman catches it immediately. You laugh now, she says, but last winter your uncle stored ham beside onions and lost both. The younger helper becomes suddenly respectful. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether bad preservation comes from poor methods or offended fortune. By midday the courtyard grows busier. More carts arrive carrying carcasses from surrounding farms. Men unload bundles of firewood beside smoke sheds. Women scrub tables constantly with vinegar water and bundles of herbs. Vinegar appears everywhere during slaughter season, cleaning barrels, washing hands, wiping tools, pickling vegetables. Medieval households trust vinegar with almost religious enthusiasm. Honestly, given the circumstances, fairly understandable. A bell rings from the monastery tower uphill. Workers pause briefly to cross themselves before continuing. One butcher quietly touches a saint medal hanging beneath his apron. Saint Anthony guard the pigs, he murmurs. Another worker snorts. Little late for that. The first man shrugs. Then may he guard the sausages. The cold deepens as afternoon passes. Frost never fully melts in the shaded corners now. Breath clouds constantly around the workers. Yet everyone seems oddly cheerful beneath the exhaustion. Perhaps because full storehouses mean security. Perhaps because hard work shared together softens fear. Or perhaps because preserving food gives people the comforting illusion that winter can be prepared for completely. Even now, it is hard to tell whether human beings truly conquer uncertainty, or merely organize it into barrels. You help carry wood toward one smoke shed where fresh pork already hangs above low fires. Inside, the air glows amber through thick haze. Juniper branches crackle softly over coals while fat drips occasionally into iron trays beneath the meat. A man tending the fire explains that some hams will cure for months. Best ones by spring, he says proudly. Then he adds, if rats, thieves, mould, damp, or greedy cousins leave them alone. A long list of enemies. Outside again, dusk begins settling early across the town walls. The slaughter yard slowly quiets as workers cover barrels and bank fires low for the night. Rows of salted meat now rest beneath cloths, inside smoke sheds, or deep in cool storage pits waiting for winter. You notice how tired everyone looks now. Salt crusts their sleeves, smoke clings to their hair, their hands ache from knives, ropes, lifting, scrubbing. Yet beneath the exhaustion sits something steadier. Relief, perhaps, because today's labour means tomorrow's meals. The Tournier dog curls beside a woodpile gnawing some suspiciously acquired bone while lanterns flicker alive around the courtyard. Above the rooftops, smoke rises slowly into the freezing evening sky, and standing there among barrels, hanging meat, wet straw, and the endless scent of wood smoke, you understand why medieval people treated preservation almost like a form of prayer. Not elegant prayer, not candlelit poetry, but practical prayer made from salt-stiff hands and aching backs. A promise whispered against winter itself. We will still be here when the snow comes. The cold settles deeper over the town in the days after slaughter season. Frost now lingers well into midday along shaded walls, and every chimney seems to breathe twice as much smoke into the pale morning sky. People walk faster through the streets with shoulders hunched beneath wool cloaks, eager for hearths, kitchens, and any room where the wind cannot follow. You spend much of one grey afternoon helping the monastery brothers move stores from the upper sheds into deeper cellars before the harder freezes arrive. Your hands quickly become numb carrying sacks of dried peas and baskets of onions through narrow stone passages lit by lantern glow. The torn-ear dog supervises the operation with absolutely no useful contribution whatsoever. By dusk, one of the older monks gestures for you to follow him farther underground than before. "Lower cellar," he says, "cooler there." The passage narrows as you descend beneath the abbey. Stone walls sweat faintly with moisture, and the air grows colder, smelling of earth, vinegar, wax, and old wood. Somewhere water drips steadily in the darkness. At the bottom lies a heavy oak door bound with iron straps. The monk unlocks it using a key large enough to discourage both thieves and optimism. Inside stretches a long vaulted chamber lined almost entirely with barrels. Dozens of them. Perhaps hundreds. Lantern light flickers softly across curved oak staves and iron hoops blackened by age. Some barrels stand taller than your chest. Others rest on wooden racks with little chalk markings scratched across their lids. Vinegar, salt pork, pickled cabbage, dried fish sealed against dampness, even apples packed carefully in straw-filled casks. Entire winters sleeping quietly underground. The monk lifts his lantern higher. "People trust walls," he murmurs, "but walls do not feed you. Barrels do." An unexpectedly philosophical cooper's advertisement. You walk slowly between the rows while the cellar creaks and settles around you. Each barrel carries its own smell leaking faintly through wood and wax. Sour cabbage, sharp vinegar, smoke, brine, fermenting ale. Preservation here feels almost alive. At one end of the cellar, two brothers inspect a large pickling barrel filled with cabbage and turnips submerged beneath cloudy brine. Flat stones hold the vegetables below the liquid surface. One monk presses the cabbage gently with a wooden paddle. "Still good," he says. "How can you tell?" asks the younger brother. The older monk shrugs. "You smell trouble before you see it." Again, medieval food safety relies heavily on suspicion and experience. The younger monk skims foam from the brine carefully. Some swear foam means the pickles are working properly. Others say too much foam invites sickness. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which signs matter most, only that someone's grandmother always claimed to know better. Near another wall, a cooper repairs a leaking barrel by lantern light. He taps iron hoops tighter with practiced little strikes while muttering softly to himself. Wood swells, wood shrinks, weather changes everything. He runs a hand across one seam and nods with satisfaction. A failed barrel can ruin months of preserved food. Vinegar leaks. Brine escapes. Dampness enters. Entire households may discover disaster only after snow blocks the roads, and replacement food becomes impossible. No wonder medieval people stare at barrels with the emotional intensity usually reserved for family arguments. The cooper notices you watching. "Best oak from northern forests," he says proudly. "Tighter grain." A nearby monk quietly replies, "You say that every year." And every year I remain correct. The cellar grows colder farther in. Here sit shelves of clay crocks sealed with wax and cloth. Dried herbs hang overhead in thick bundles beside strings of garlic and onions. Rosemary, sage, thyme, dill, wormwood. The herbs flavour food, certainly, but they also preserve, repel pests, freshen stale air, and soothe anxious minds during long winters. One monk hangs fresh bunches of mint above several grain bins. For mice, you ask. For the smell, he says. Then after a pause and perhaps mice. Fair enough again. You stop beside a broad, shallow vat where fish rests beneath layers of salt and vinegar. The scent rises sharp enough to sting your nose immediately. The monk beside it smiles faintly. Good preservation should offend someone slightly. An admirable philosophy for medieval cuisine. At the rear of the cellar stands a tiny shrine built into the stone wall. A beeswax candle burns before a painted saint while little offerings sit beneath it, dried herbs, carved wooden fish, a tiny loaf hardened nearly to stone. Saint Nicholas, you ask. The monk nods. Sailors pray for calm seas. Cellar keepers pray for calm barrels. Some monasteries bless their storage rooms each winter with incense and holy water. Others carve crosses into barrel lids. One brother quietly claims a prayer spoken while sealing pickles helps them keep longer. Even now, it's hard to tell how much preservation depends upon chemistry and how much upon comfort. Perhaps people simply work more carefully when they believe sacred things are watching. A distant thud echoes through the cellar as someone rolls another barrel into place above. The sound lingers through the stone vaults like slow thunder. You move toward a smaller side chamber where ale casks age in cool darkness. The smell changes immediately: yeast, grain, damp wood, faint sweetness. Monasteries brew constantly. Ale rarely keeps as long as salted meat or dried grain, but safer drinkable water is never guaranteed in crowded towns. Weak ale accompanies nearly every meal. A brother checks the froth spilling gently from one cask. Too warm and it turns sour, he says. Too cold. It sleeps. You begin noticing how preservation always balances between extremes. Too wet, too dry, too warm, too cold, too much salt, too little smoke. Human beings spend centuries learning tiny corrections against decay. Not defeating nature exactly, negotiating with it. The tawny dog suddenly appears beside you, carrying what seems alarmingly like half a sausage. A monk points sternly. That dog understands storage security better than some pilgrims. The dog ignores this criticism completely. Hours pass quietly underground while lanterns burn lower and workers continue their endless careful tasks. Turning barrels, checking seals, hanging herbs, recording stores in wax tablets smudged with ink and cold fingers. Above ground, night thickens over the monastery roofs. Wind brushes softly against shutters while frost forms silver patterns along the cloister stones. Down here beneath the abbey, however, time feels slower. Food waits patiently in darkness. Cabbages transformed by salt and brine, meat protected by smoke and cold, grain sleeping safely in sacks, ale aging in oak. And standing among the barrels while candlelight flickers across old stone, you begin to understand that preservation is not merely survival, it is memory. Summer sunlight hidden inside dried herbs, autumn fields sleeping inside grain sacks, rivers sealed beneath smoked fish, entire seasons captured carefully against the coming snow. Morning arrives white with frost. The monastery bells sound sharper in the cold air now, each note carrying far across frozen roofs and stiffened fields beyond the town walls. You wake beneath your wool blanket to find the guest house windows edged with delicate ice patterns that look almost too beautiful for a world so concerned with survival. The tawny dog sleeps pressed against the hearthstones with the satisfaction of an animal who has absolutely no intention of contributing to society today. Outside, the cold bites instantly at your face. Every puddle has turned to thin grey ice beneath scattered straw. Chimneys release thick smoke straight upward into still air. Somewhere nearby, A rooster attempts enthusiasm and fails halfway through. You leave the monastery gates while dawn spreads slowly across the fields beyond town. Frost silvers the harvested stubble stretching over the countryside, and the roads crunch softly beneath your boots instead of sucking greedily at them for once. Winter has not fully arrived yet, but it has sent notice. A farmer walking ahead carries bundles of drying herbs balanced across his shoulders. You follow the road beside him until the houses thin and open fields surround you completely. Here the world smells cleaner. Cold earth, smoke drifting from distant cottages, faint sweetness from drying apples somewhere nearby. The farmer gestures towards several wooden racks standing beside a low stone cottage. Still drying before deep freezed, he says. You approach slowly. Rows of sliced apples lie spread across woven trays beneath linen covers. Beside them hang onions braided together with twine, strips of turnip threaded on cords, bunches of sage, and long strings of beans drying hard in the cold air. Preservation stretches across the countryside exactly as it does inside town walls. Different methods, perhaps. Same purpose. The farmer's wife kneels beside another rack turning mushroom slices carefully by hand. Need air beneath them, she explains, else they soften again. Her fingers move with practiced gentleness despite the cold. Drying may be the oldest preservation method of all, simpler than barrels, simpler than smokehouses, sun, wind, patience. Humanity discovered long ago that food survives longer once moisture leaves it behind, though medieval weather enjoys complicating that process whenever possible. Near the cottage roof hang little bundles of herbs tied with red thread. For cooking, you ask. The farmer's wife nods. And for sickness, and for luck. Some swear sage hung near drying meat keeps flies away. Others claim red thread itself frightens corruption from food stores. One old woman nearby insists garlic wards off winter fevers if dried facing east. No one can quite agree whether preserved food requires more salt or more superstition. Perhaps equal amounts. You continue farther along the frosted road while pale sunlight slowly strengthens overhead. Fields lie mostly empty now except for scattered gleaners searching among harvested rows for forgotten grains or turnips missed during collection. Nothing edible should remain unused. A pair of children spread peas across cloth beside a stone wall warmed faintly by morning light. Their grandmother watches closely from a stool wrapped in layers of wool. Turn them every hour, she warns. One child groans dramatically. You wish peas to rot, she snaps immediately. The child resumes turning with sudden dedication. You pause near another cottage where strips of venison dry beneath the eaves, beside bunches of lavender and rosemary. Smoke leaks gently from a little vent near the roof peak. Inside, you discover a narrow loft warmed by rising chimney heat, where herbs, beans, and apple slices hang suspended from rafters above the family's living space. The entire cottage participates in preservation. Beds beside drying onions, meals cooked beneath hanging herbs, children sleeping under strips of meat slowly curing in chimney smoke. A woman stirring cabbage soup notices your curiosity. Warm air rises, she says simply, so food rises too. Ingenious, really. The loft smells wonderful. Smoke, sage, apples, wood ash, wool blankets drying beside the fire below. One elderly man seated near the hearth carves little crosses into wooden storage lids while speaking quietly. My mother said marked lids keep grain calm. You glance toward the sacks beside the wall. Calm. Grain dislikes storms. The woman cooking soup rolls her eyes. He speaks to barley after ale. The old man shrugs without embarrassment. And the barley listens. Honestly, medieval life sounds far more entertaining once everyone stops pretending to be sensible. By midday, clouds gather again overhead, dulling the frost-covered fields into muted silver and grey. You continue walking along hedgerows where rose hips dry bright red against bare branches. A shepherd repairing fencing nearby hangs little strips of mutton above a brazier burning peat and juniper. Travel food, he explains, keeps longer smoked twice. He offers you a piece tough enough to challenge your jaw permanently, though the flavour is rich beneath the salt and smoke. Further down the road stands a communal drying shed shared between several nearby families. Inside, racks fill nearly every inch of space. Pears, mushrooms, herbs, beans, fish brought inland from the river. The air inside feels warm and earthy despite the cold outdoors. One woman checks bundles suspended from ceiling beams while muttering softly under her breath. Prayer, you ask. Counting, she replies. Preservation requires constant counting. How much grain remains? How many onions spoiled? How many barrels sealed? How many days until snow? Outside again, wind moves through the bare trees with soft whispering sounds. Frost begins melting slowly from branches as afternoon deepens, dripping steadily onto dead leaves below. You stop beside a roadside shrine where travellers have left tiny offerings tucked beneath the saint's weathered stone feet. A crust of bread, dried flowers, one little pouch of beans. Food offerings appear often near winter. People understand hunger intimately enough to pray against it with whatever they can spare. The Tornier dog suddenly bursts from nearby bushes carrying what appears suspiciously like a stolen turnip. A woman from the drying shed shouts after him. That animal survives better than half the village. Hard to argue. As dusk approaches, smoke begins rising thicker from cottages across the fields. Families bring drying racks indoors before evening damp settles again. Doors close against the cold. Fires brighten behind horn-paned windows. You walk slowly back toward town beneath a sky fading pale blue into iron grey. And everywhere around you, preservation continues quietly. Not dramatic. Not glorious. Just endless small acts repeated day after day. Turning peas, hanging herbs, checking smoke, counting sacks, watching weather. Human beings have learned that survival rarely depends upon one grand miracle. More often, it depends upon whether someone remembered to bring the apples in before frost. A hard wind blows through the town the next evening, rattling shutters and carrying the scent of snow from somewhere far beyond the hills. Market awnings snap sharply overhead while merchants hurry to secure ropes, barrels, and anything else foolish enough to trust autumn weather. You spend most of the afternoon wandering the crowded lower streets where travellers gather before roads become too dangerous with ice and mud. Pilgrims tighten cloak cords. Carters inspect wheels nervously. Traders count coins beneath lantern light while muttering calculations that sound increasingly desperate. Winter shortens patience as much as daylight. Near the southern gate you notice a small crowd gathered around a brightly painted wagon, trimmed with faded ribbons and dangling charms made from bone, feathers, and bits of polished copper. Smoke curls from a little iron stove mounted beneath the cart, carrying the smell of cloves and dried apples into the cold air. A peddler. Or perhaps 3 different professions disguised beneath one hat. The man standing atop the wagon wears layered cloaks patched from 6 fabrics, and a cap trimmed with fox fur gone ragged at the edges. Tiny bells jingle softly whenever he moves. Spices he calls cheerfully. Dried pears, salt cakes, winter charms approved by at least one reasonably trustworthy priest. A woman nearby mutters, that priest was drunk. The peddler bows theatrically. Drunk priests deserve comfort too. The crowd laughs despite itself. You drift closer while he lays out his wares beneath lantern light. Little cloth packets of dried mushrooms, strings of garlic, smoked sausages wrapped in waxed linen, hard travel bread dense enough to survive siege warfare, tiny jars of preserved berries floating in honey. The wagon smells marvellous. Smoke, cloves, leather, wool, dried fruit, damp wood, a moving collection of preserved seasons. The peddler notices your interest and hands you a sliver of dried apple dusted lightly with spice. Southern method, he says proudly, dry twice, smoke once. The apple tastes sweet, tart, and faintly smoky beneath the spice. Expensive, you ask? Everything useful is expensive. A painfully medieval business model. You linger beside the wagon while townsfolk inspect the goods carefully. Travellers depend heavily on preserved foods. Roads grow dangerous in winter. Inns unreliable. Fresh produce nearly impossible to find. A pilgrim with hard bread, smoked fish, dried peas, and cheese stands a better chance of reaching spring. One old pilgrim woman buys several little sacks of dried beans while crossing herself. "Road's close early this year," she murmurs. The peddler nods. Snow already north of the ridge. That news moves quietly through the crowd like cold water. The peddler lowers his voice conspiratorially and gestures towards several tiny packets tied with blue thread. "Juniper and salt," he says, "hang near your stores. Keep spoilage away." A skeptical farmer snorts. "Salt keeps spoilage away." The peddler smiles calmly. Then perhaps Juniper keeps the salt company. Honestly, not a bad recovery. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether travelling peddlers are clever merchants, wandering fools, secret scholars, or harmless tricksters. Most likely they are all four, depending on weather and coin. You notice strange little objects hanging throughout the wagon. Dried fish bones tied with ribbon, small iron nails wrapped in red cloth, tiny saint medals dangling beside rabbit feet. "Good luck charms, you ask?" "Preservation charms," he corrects solemnly. Then, after a pause, which is nearly the same thing, a woman buying smoked sausage asks whether garlic truly protects cellars from rot spirits. The peddler shrugs magnificently. "I've never seen a rot spirit near garlic." Impossible to argue with evidence that's strong. As dusk thickens, snow begins falling lightly through the torchlight beyond the gate. Tiny flakes drift sideways on the wind, melting against cloaks and wagon covers before slowly beginning to stick atop roof beams. The first snow always changes a medieval town instantly. Voices soften slightly. People hurry more. Every hearth suddenly feels precious. The peddler lights another lantern inside his wagon while travellers crowd closer for warmth. He begins telling stories between sails, as peddlers inevitably do. One tale speaks of northern fishermen who bury barrels beneath frozen ground to preserve trout through entire winters. Another claims desert traders dry meat so thoroughly it lasts across months of travel. Some swear sailors preserve lemons in salt, he says dramatically. A nearby monk looks horrified. Why would anyone preserve lemons? The peddler spreads his hands. Why would anyone eat them fresh? Fair point again. You buy a small pouch of dried pears wrapped in cloth along with a heel of hard travel bread. The bread could probably survive being used as roofing material, but it smells pleasantly of rye and caraway. Good for roads, the peddler assures you. Also effective against burglars if thrown correctly. The Tournier dog circles beneath the wagon hopefully while snow gathers lightly along his back. The peddler eventually tosses him a strip of dried sausage. A professional courtesy, he says. Nearby, a pair of merchants argue over whether smoked eels travel better packed in straw or cloth. One insists straw absorbs dampness. The other claims straw attracts mice. Medieval commerce appears fueled primarily by confident disagreement. The snow falls thicker now, whitening the market square beneath lantern glow. Shopkeepers begin shuttering stalls while church bells ring evening prayers through the storm-dark air. The peddler secures his wagon carefully, tying cloths tighter around the preserved goods. "Winter teaches people quickly," he says quietly while working. "Fresh food disappears first. After that, only what keeps remains." His words linger as you watch snow settle softly atop barrels and rooftops around the square. All summer, food belongs to the moment. Fruit ripens and vanishes. Fish spoils. Milk sours. Bread hardens. But preserved food resists time, at least for a while. Smoked meat remembers fire. Dried apples remember sunlight. Salted fish remembers rivers beneath ice. Human beings learned long ago that survival depends not merely upon abundance, but upon carrying abundance forward. The peddler climbs into his wagon at last while the town grows quieter beneath snow and bells. "Storm by morning," he predicts. Then he grins faintly. "Good weather for people with full cellars." You pull your cloak tighter and begin the slow walk uphill toward the monastery lights glowing warmly through the falling snow. Behind you, the peddler's lantern flickers softly inside the little wagon full of dried fruits, smoked meats, herbs, charms, and stories. A wandering archive of everything human beings refuse to lose to winter. Snow continues through the night. By morning, the town has softened beneath a white covering that hides mud, quiets wheels, and makes even the crooked rooftops appear briefly respectable. Chimneys send dark smoke curling into the pale winter sky, while bells echo cleanly through the cold air. You stand beneath the monastery gate watching townsfolk move carefully across the square below, their boots crunching over snow-packed straw. Cloaks have grown thicker now. Fur linings appear more often. People lower their heads against the wind and carry bundles tucked tightly beneath their arms. Winter has properly arrived, and with it comes the season of stored food. Tonight, the lord of the nearby manor hosts a feast inside his hall, partly to honour successful autumn stores and partly, some suspect, to remind everyone exactly who controls most of the grain. Medieval generosity often arrives carrying administrative paperwork. A steward from the manor appears at the monastery shortly before dusk requesting several monks attend. Somehow you are included among the travellers invited to fill benches and witness noble hospitality. Or perhaps simply to make the hall feel busier. You follow the torchlit road uphill through falling snow toward the manor keep rising above the town. Its stone walls glow amber beneath iron brackets of fire, while guards wrapped in wool and fur stamp warmth back into their boots beside the gate. The tornado dog follows at a discreet distance, clearly believing all feast belong morally to him. Inside the outer yard, servants hurry between kitchens and storage sheds carrying baskets, barrels, and steaming pots. The scent drifting through the cold air is almost overwhelming. Roasting meat, spiced ale, smoke, fresh bread, onion stew. And beneath it all, the unmistakable smell of preserved food brought proudly back into the light. You enter the great hall through thick oak doors banded with iron. Warmth rolls toward you instantly along with candlelight flickering across soot-dark beams high overhead. Rushes cover the stone floor, mixed with sweet herbs crushed beneath countless boots. Long tables stretch the length of the hall already crowded with guests, merchants, monks, minor retainers, village reeves, and household servants all sit according to rank so carefully arranged it could probably survive military inspection. At the far end, beneath painted banners, sits the Lord himself, wrapped in fur-lined velvet beside an enormous hearth. The feast begins slowly. First come trenchers of coarse bread and thick onion pottage flavoured with smoked pork fat saved from autumn slaughter. Then platters arrive, carried by sweating servants weaving through the crowded hall. salted beef simmered tender in ale, smoked river trout glazed with honey, pickled cabbage sharp enough to wake forgotten ancestors, hard cheese softened beside the fire, dried apples stewed with cinnamon brought by southern traders months earlier. Nearly every dish depends upon preservation. Fresh summer abundance vanished long ago from these lands. Winter feasting means drawing carefully from smokehouses, barrels, drying racks, and cellar stores. A monk beside you tears bread thoughtfully. People think feasts celebrate wealth, he murmurs. He gestures toward the platters. They celebrate successful storage. A remarkably practical definition of nobility. Across the hall, musicians scrape fiddles and pluck strings near the hearth, while servants refill cups with dark ale and heated wine spiced against the cold. Candles drip beeswax steadily down iron holders, filling the air with warm sweetness beneath the heavier smells of meat and smoke. You notice how proudly the household displays preserved foods tonight. Strings of sausages hang near the kitchen archway. Great hams rest upon sideboards polished with fat and smoke. Pickled vegetables appear in painted bowls beside trenchers of rye bread. Preservation has become status. One visiting merchant boasts loudly that his warehouses contain enough salt cod to feed an army. A nearby knight replies, "Then I pity the army." The table laughs harder than the joke deserves, which is generally how medieval humour works after enough ale. Further down the hall, an old woman explains to several servants how noble kitchens preserve lemons in honey and salt for winter sauces. Some swear it cures coughs too, she says. A cook nearby mutters, or causes them. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether exotic preservation methods represent wisdom or expensive nonsense. A platter of smoked goose arrives next, its skin dark and shining beneath candlelight. The steward announces proudly that it was cured with juniper and cloves before hanging above oak smoke for nearly 3 weeks. Everyone nods with proper admiration. Preserved food here carries memory with it. Autumn hunts, river catches, summer herbs dried months earlier, grain harvested before frost. The feast gathers entire vanished seasons back onto the table. At one point, servants wheel in a massive pie decorated with little pastry birds. The hall applauds enthusiastically despite no one fully trusting what meat actually hides inside. Medieval pies possess an adventurous relationship with certainty. Snow taps softly against the high shutters while the hall grows warmer and louder. Steam rises from cloaks drying near the hearth. Dogs wander beneath tables collecting dropped scraps with professional dedication. The Tourneur dog has somehow infiltrated the feast entirely, and now sleeps triumphantly beside the fire gnawing a bone larger than his head. A true master strategist. Near the Lord's table, 2 stewards quietly discuss grain counts for the coming months. Their expressions remain serious despite the feast around them, because winter still stretches ahead. A single celebration changes nothing about the cold outside those walls. One poor harvest, one spoiled cellar, one failed salt shipment. That is all it takes. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval feasts celebrate security or merely distract people briefly from how fragile that security remains. The musicians slow their playing as evening deepens. Candles burn lower, servants bring out nuts, dried pears, and little honey cakes preserved carefully for special occasions. You taste one small cake flavoured with cinnamon and realize instantly how rare sweetness becomes during winter. A monk near you closes his eyes briefly while chewing. "Worth every prayer," he whispers. Outside, wind moves snow softly against the keep walls. Inside, warmth glows across flushed faces and polished cups while preserved food continues circulating from kitchen to table in endless careful procession. Salted meat from autumn, dried herbs from summer, pickled cabbage from harvest, ale brewed before frost, all the quiet labour of preservation transformed now into comfort, celebration, and light against the winter dark. And sitting there beneath the smoky rafters while bells ring faintly from the distant monastery through falling snow, you begin to understand that preserved food does more than keep people alive. It lets them gather. It lets them feast. It lets them believe, if only for one warm candlelit night, that winter can be endured together. The feast ends late beneath drifting snow and fading torchlight. You leave the manor hall wrapped tightly in your cloak while cold air rushes against your face hard enough to feel almost clean after the thick warmth inside. Behind you, laughter still echoes faintly through the keep windows, along with the clatter of trenchers and the weary voices of servants beginning the long work of cleaning. The torn-ear dog trots proudly at your side, carrying a stolen crust nearly the size of his head. An impressive achievement considering the security arrangements. Snow creaks beneath your boots as you descend toward town. Most windows glow softly now behind horn panes and shutters. Smoke hangs low over the rooftops, trapped beneath the heavy winter air. Somewhere a baby cries briefly before quieting again. Somewhere else, a drunk sings with great confidence and very little accuracy. The world feels smaller in winter. People gather close around warmth, food, and familiar walls. By morning, however, the pleasant softness left by the feast has faded. Cold reality returns quickly in medieval life. Bells ring before dawn as always. Fires need feeding. Animals require tending. Bread must still be baked. And today the manor court gathers. You follow townsfolk toward the guild hall near the market square where local disputes are judged beneath the authority of the Lord Steward. Snow has been trampled into grey slush outside the doors, and anxious villagers crowd together, stamping warmth into their boots while waiting to be called. The air smells sharply of wet wool and impatience. Inside, the hall feels colder than the feast hall ever did despite the fire burning near the dais. Long benches hold farmers, merchants, labourers, and monastery brothers clutching documents, tally sticks, or little cloth bags of evidence. Preservation disputes fill much of winter court business. Spoiled grain, leaking barrels, false measures, stolen salt. Human survival generates extraordinary administrative paperwork. The steward presiding today wears a fur-lined cloak and the expression of a man already regretting every decision leading to his current profession. A clerk beside him scratches notes onto parchment with ink-stained fingers while trying unsuccessfully to keep warm. The first dispute involves a miller accused of watering flour sacks before weighing them. The accused protests loudly. Damp air added the weight naturally. A farmer replies, "Then perhaps the air owes me coin." Several people nod approvingly at this logic. The steward sighs deeply. Grain preservation lies at the centre of nearly every argument today. One widow claims her landlord stored communal rye in a leaking granary. Another man accuses a cooper of selling barrels with faulty seals. A fish merchant insists his salted herrings spoiled because the town watch delayed his wagon at the gate too long during autumn rain. The watch captain responds, "Your fish smelled dead before arrival." The merchant throws up his hands dramatically. They are fish. That is their nature. Hard to refute philosophically. Near the rear benches, several women whisper about a family whose winter pork stores developed black mould last week. Some say the meat was cured poorly. Others insist the household offended fortune by quarrelling during slaughter season. No one can quite agree whether spoiled food reflects bad practice or bad luck. Probably both again. A monk from the monastery presents careful records showing grain borrowed to villagers during the previous winter has not yet been repaid fully. The steward examines the wax tablets while villagers shift uneasily. Debt tied to food carries particular shame. You notice how preservation changes power itself here. Whoever controls salt, grain, barrels, smokehouses, or storehouses controls survival. Lords understand this. Monasteries understand it. Merchants certainly understand it. One elderly farmer steps forward holding a little sack of blackened rye kernels. "Mould?" he says quietly. The entire room leans slightly closer. Spoiled grain frightens people. Bad rye can sicken entire households. Some victims stumble strangely after eating it. Others see visions or suffer terrible fevers. Medieval people often blame curses, demons, or poisoned air because the truth remains invisible inside the grain itself. The steward sniffs the sack carefully, then recoils. "Burn it," he orders immediately. The farmer crosses himself. A woman behind you murmurs that St. Benedict protects against grain sickness if candles are lit properly before harvest. Another whispers that cats sleeping atop storage bins keep corruption away. Those who tell the tale never fully agree why disaster visits one cellar and spares another. The court continues through midday while snow falls steadily outside the windows. More disputes arrive. A baker accused of stretching dough with pea flour during feast week. A butcher charged with selling spoiled sausage to travellers. A merchant claiming someone stole half a salt shipment from his warehouse. That final accusation sparks immediate interest throughout the room. Salt theft threatens entire communities once winter deepens. Without salt, remaining meat stores cannot be cured properly if thawing occurs. Fish shipments fail. Preservation weakens everywhere. The accused warehouse worker protests innocence desperately. "I only borrowed some—" The steward stares at him. One does not borrow salt. A surprisingly powerful sentence. Outside, during a pause in proceedings, townsfolk gather round braziers warming their hands while discussing the cases. Snow settles softly across cloaks and hats. Smoke from nearby chimneys drifts low through the square. A cooper sipping weak ale tells you quietly that hard winters always increase court disputes. Food shrinks, he says, tempers grow. Another man nearby mutters that spoiled stores destroy friendships faster than war. You suspect he speaks from experience? Back inside, the final dispute of the day concerns a widow whose pickle barrel burst during freezing weather, ruining most of her winter vegetables. She seeks reduced taxes because her household stores failed through what she calls an act of cruel weather and weak wood. The cooper who built the barrel objects loudly. The widow objects louder. Eventually, the steward reduces part of her payment while ordering the cooper to repair future barrels properly. Neither side appears satisfied, which probably means medieval justice has functioned normally. As court finally dismisses near dusk, weary villagers shuffle back into the snowy streets carrying worries home with them. Some clutch grain receipts, others hold repayment orders or small fines. Yet beneath all the arguments and accusations, one truth remains quietly obvious. Preservation matters because failure matters. A spoiled barrel is not inconvenience. It is hunger waiting patiently in the dark. You walk slowly back toward the monastery while snowflakes drift through torchlight around you. The tawny dog trots ahead, sniffing hopefully at every doorstep. Behind shuttered windows, families already prepare evening meals from winter stores, salt pork simmering in pots, dried beans softening over fires, pickled cabbage ladled beside coarse bread. Every preserved meal tonight represents work completed correctly months earlier. And every mistake, every damp sack, weak barrel, careless seal, or stolen handful of salt, echoes forward into winter like a quiet warning. Several days later, the snow eases at last, leaving the roads hard with frozen ruts and the fields beyond town glittering pale beneath a weak winter sunlight. The monastery bells sound softer this morning somehow, muffled slightly by snow piled along walls and rooftops. Pilgrim weather, one monk calls it. You're not entirely certain whether that means the roads are safe or simply survivable. Either way, travellers gather early near the eastern gate, preparing to continue south before heavier storms return. Cloaks are tightened, packs inspected, bread wrapped carefully in cloth. Every pilgrim carries food with almost ceremonial caution now. Fresh food barely exists on the road this season. Preservation travels with you, or hunger does. You join a small group leaving town shortly after dawn. 2 pilgrims bound for a shrine farther south, a merchant escorting dyed wool, an elderly woman carrying more saint badges than seems structurally reasonable, and, naturally, the Tournier dog who appoints himself guardian of the expedition without consulting anyone. The gate guards lift the bar slowly while frost smokes pale in the cold air around their boots. Beyond the walls, the pilgrim road winds across frozen fields and dark hedgerows beneath a sky the colour of dull pewter. Snow crunches beneath your steps while your breath drifts ahead in white clouds. Travel in winter moves slowly. Everyone understands the danger of sweat freezing beneath wool. The older pilgrim woman walks beside you carrying a satchel that smells strongly of garlic and smoked fish. Best road food, she says proudly, keeps forever. Judging by the smell, perhaps literally forever. She opens the satchel to reveal hard bread, dried apples, onions, smoked herring wrapped in cloth, and a little wax-sealed jar of preserved berries. Pilgrim meals rely almost entirely on preserved foods. Bread baked hard enough to survive weeks, cheese aged deliberately, sausages smoked nearly black, ale carried in skin flasks, dried peas for roadside stews when fires become possible. Human beings learned long ago that travellers cannot depend upon fresh harvests waiting politely beside every road. You walk for hours through silent countryside broken only by distant crows and the occasional creak of wagon wheels. Smoke rises thinly from scattered cottages where families remain close to their hearths. Near midday, the group stops beside a roadside shrine sheltered beneath bare oak trees. Snow gathers around the weathered stone saint standing watch over the traveller's road. Someone has left offerings there recently. A crust of bread, a little onion, 2 dried mushrooms tied with blue thread. Food offerings appear often along pilgrim routes during winter. Travellers pray not only for safety but for endurance. A full stomach matters nearly as much as divine favour on cold roads. The merchant travelling with you unwraps smoked sausage from waxed cloth while the others share bread and dried fruit. The bread is so hard one pilgrim jokes it could stop arrows. The older woman replies, "Then eat carefully. You may become invincible." A surprisingly lively sense of humour for dawn in freezing weather. You chew slowly while snowflakes drift lazily through the trees overhead. Nearby, the merchant explains how some travellers soak stale bread in hot ale or broth to soften it after long journeys. Else you lose teeth before reaching holy ground. Entirely believable. The road continues through forest by afternoon. Frost clings silver to bare branches while your boots crack thin ice along puddles hidden beneath snow. Ravens watch silently from the trees as though judging everyone's travel arrangements. The pilgrims speak quietly now, conserving warmth. One man tells a story about northern monasteries storing fish beneath ice houses packed with snow year-round. Another swears dried cod lasts longer if blessed before sea voyages. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how much preservation depends on skill and how much upon prayer. The forest road eventually opens onto a tiny roadside village clustered around a stone chapel and an alehouse darkened by smoke. Travellers pause here often before attempting the longer stretch southward. Inside the alehouse, warmth arrives blessedly. The hearth crackles beneath an iron pot of bean stew thickened with salted pork and onions. Smoke curls beneath the low rafters, blackened nearly pitch dark from decades of fires. Pilgrims crowd close together on benches while steaming cloaks dry slowly beside the flames. An innkeeper's daughter brings trenchers of coarse bread and little dishes of pickled turnips sharp enough to wake the dead. Winter stores running thin already ask the merchant. The innkeeper shrugs. Depends whose cellar you inspect. A diplomatic answer. You notice strings of garlic hanging beside the hearth, along with drying herbs and little smoked fish suspended from ceiling hooks. Even roadside inns preserve constantly through winter. A failed food supply could leave travellers stranded hungry between storms. Near the fire, an old pilgrim warms his hands while describing a journey years earlier when snow blocked the roads for nearly 3 weeks. We lived on dried peas and smoked eel, he says. Someone asks how they survived. He blinks slowly. Badly. Medieval honesty remains refreshingly direct. The Tournier dog curls beneath the table, gnawing some mysterious object no one claims ownership of. Outside the windows, dusk begins arriving early again. Winter daylight disappears with alarming efficiency this far north. Travellers murmur about whether to continue tomorrow depending on weather. One woman unwraps little cakes made from oats, and honey preserved carefully in cloth. For strength, she says. The cakes smell faintly of cinnamon and wood smoke. Another pilgrim carries a flask of vinegar mixed with herbs, claiming it prevents sickness during long journeys. A nearby monk mutters, or causes different sickness. The room chuckles softly. As darkness settles fully beyond the alehouse walls, wind brushes snow against the shutters in dry, whispering sounds. Candles flicker across tired faces while travellers eat preserved foods, gathered from dozens of villages and months of labour. Smoked fish from rivers now frozen. Apples dried before autumn rains. Bread baked long ago. Cheese aging patiently since summer pasture days. Entire seasons travelling beside you in satchels and barrels. And sitting there among pilgrims warming frozen hands beside the smoky hearth, you begin understanding that preserved food does more than fight hunger on the road. It creates roads. Because journeys become possible only when human beings learn how to carry nourishment farther than the harvest itself could ever travel. The storm arrives before dawn. You hear it first in your sleep, a low, restless wind pressing against the alehouse shutters, followed by the dry hiss of snow sweeping across the roof. Somewhere below, a loose sign creaks rhythmically in the darkness like an old sailor complaining at sea. By morning the road has vanished completely. Snow lies deep against the village walls, drifting high around wagons and fences until familiar shapes seem softened into strange new forms. Smoke rises straight upward from chimneys into pale frozen air, while everyone remaining indoors suddenly feels like the wisest person alive. The innkeeper opens the shutters briefly, looks outside once and shuts them again immediately. Well, he announces, the weather has chosen our schedule. A deeply medieval approach to planning. Travellers gather near the hearth wrapped in blankets and cloaks while snow continues falling beyond the windows. No one leaves willingly now. Roads disappear quickly during storms like this. People lose direction. Horses stumble into ditches. Travellers freeze quietly beneath hedgerows only a mile from shelter. So the alehouse becomes a little winter island, and preserved food becomes the bridge carrying everyone across the storm. The innkeeper's wife begins the morning by checking stores beneath the floorboards and in the rear cellar. You help carry sacks while lantern light flickers across the cramped storage room behind the kitchen. The cellar smells strongly of onions, ale, damp wood, and smoked meat. Barrels line the walls from floor to ceiling. Pickled cabbage sealed beneath cloth. Salted fish packed in brine. Beans and peas stored in sacks above the stone floor. Wheels of hard cheese aging quietly in the cold dark. A proper winter cellar feels almost reassuring, like standing inside preparation itself. The innkeeper lifts one barrel lid carefully and checks the pickles beneath. Still crisp, he says proudly. His wife snorts. You say that like you grew the cabbages personally. I supervised emotionally. Fair enough again. Upstairs, snow rattles softly against the shutters while the hearth fire burns continuously from dawn onward. Travellers settle into the strange slow rhythm storms create. Waiting, listening, eating, sleeping, watching weather. Outside movement becomes impossible. Inside time stretches warmly. The innkeeper serves thick pottage flavoured with smoked ham and dried peas soaked overnight. Beside it comes hard bread toasted near the coals and rubbed lightly with garlic. Simple food. Careful food. Food designed to survive months before reaching the table. A young pilgrim near the fire asks how long the stores might last if the storm continues. The innkeeper shrugs. A week comfortably, 2 weeks honestly. Beyond that we become creative. No one asks what medieval creativity involving food might include. Probably wisely. As morning fades into afternoon, snow continues piling against the doors. Men periodically push it back using wooden shovels before drifts grow too heavy. Their beards gather frost instantly outdoors. Inside, cloaks steam gently beside the hearth while candles burn low and steady. Someone mends gloves near the window. Someone else sharpens a knife beside the fire. And always the preserved food keeps appearing. Dried apples stewed into sweetness again. Salt pork sliced thin into bean soup. Pickled onions served beside cheese. Ella brewed months earlier. The storm outside makes every stored meal feel almost miraculous. One traveller unwraps a little pouch of herbs and tosses rosemary into the hearth flames. The scent rises warm and sharp through the smoky room. For good keeping, she says. An old pilgrim nearby nods seriously. Rosemary strengthens stores. The innkeeper mutters, so does cold weather and proper sealing. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether survival comes from blessings or craftsmanship. Most likely both sleep in the same bed during winter. By evening the wind worsens. Snow claws against the shutters in sudden bursts while the roof timbers groan softly overhead. The travellers draw closer to the hearth almost instinctively. Stories begin then. Storms always produce stories. One merchant tells of a northern keep trapped by snow for a month, where people survived entirely on smoked eel and barley cakes. Another speaks of monks preserving entire harvests in underground ice chambers packed with straw and river ice. A woman near the fire claims her grandmother sealed butter beneath salt in clay crocks that lasted all winter. No one can quite agree whether she was a genius or a witch, she says. A monk sipping ale replies calmly, many geniuses become witches after enough success. The room laughs softly. Outside, darkness settles completely by late afternoon, though honestly the storm made noon feel nearly like twilight already. Lanterns glow amber across the alehouse, while smoke curls lazily toward the rafters. The tawny dog sleeps belly up beside the fire in a pose of astonishing trust. You sit near the hearth eating smoked trout with coarse bread while snow buries the road beyond the walls. The fish tastes of salt, oak smoke, and cold rivers far away beneath the ice. And all at once you understand something deeply human about preserved food during storms. It creates emotional warmth as much as physical survival. Fresh food belongs to good weather. Preserved food belongs to endurance, to patience, to waiting safely while winter exhausts itself outside. Later that night, the innkeeper checks the cellar once more before sleep. You follow him downstairs carrying a lantern through the quiet alehouse. The barrels rest unchanged in the darkness, silent, dependable, food sleeping patiently against disaster. The innkeeper touches one cask thoughtfully. "Storms scare people less when cellars are full," he says quietly. Then, after a pause, empty shelves make louder winds. Above you, snow and darkness continue pressing against the little roadside inn while travellers sleep wrapped in blankets near the fire. Yet beneath the floorboards, inside barrels and sacks and hanging bundles of herbs, lies enough stored summer and autumn to hold fear at bay a little longer. And sometimes that is all preservation truly means: not defeating winter, simply lasting through it together. By the third morning, the storm begins to loosen its grip on the world. The wind fades first, then the snow slows from wild swirling sheets into quiet drifting flakes that settle softly along the windowsills. At dawn, the innkeeper opens the shutters and pale winter light spills across the alehouse floorboards, touching boots drying beside the hearth and cloaks hanging motionless from pegs. Outside, the road lies buried beneath smooth white drifts. But the sky has softened, and somehow that changes everything. The travellers wake slowly in the warmth of the common room while the smell of barley porridge and toasted bread rises from the kitchen fire. Someone stirs the embers gently. Someone coughs sleep from their chest. The Tourneur dog stretches beside the hearth with theatrical exhaustion, as though he personally battled the storm all night. The innkeeper serves breakfast carefully from the remaining stores. Oat porridge sweetened faintly with honey preserved since late summer. Smoked sausage sliced thin to make it last. Hard cheese softened beside the fire. Dried pears simmered back into tenderness. Winter food teaches patience with texture. Nothing arrives quickly. Beans soak overnight. Salted meat must be boiled slowly. Dried fruit softens by degrees beside low heat. Even comfort takes time here. You sit quietly near the hearth while daylight slowly brightens the room. Around you, travellers begin speaking about the road again. How deep the drifts might be, whether nearby bridges froze solid, which monasteries still offer shelter farther south. Yet no one sounds hurried anymore. Storms change people briefly. They remind everyone how thin the line can be between safety and exposure, between a warm bowl of stew and an empty road beneath snow. The old pilgrim woman unwraps the last of her smoked fish and shares pieces freely around the table. "Better eaten among company," she says. No one argues. Outside, men begin shoveling paths through the snow toward the stable and well. The sound of scraping wood drifts softly through the morning air. Smoke rises blue-grey from chimneys across the village while bells from the little chapel ring faintly over the frozen fields. The innkeeper's wife descends once more into the cellar to count stores after the storm. You follow quietly, carrying a lantern. The barrels remain where they always were, silent and steady in the cool dark. Pickled vegetables beneath brine, beans sleeping in sacks, ale resting in oak, smoked meat hanging patiently overhead. You realize now that nearly every peaceful moment you experienced during this journey depended upon rooms like this one, hidden beneath floors and stone walls. Without preserved food, there would be no long winter feasts, no pilgrim roads in snow season, no monasteries sheltering strangers, no crowded alehouses surviving storms, no warmth lingering through dark months. Human beings did not merely preserve food, they preserved continuity. The innkeeper's wife brushes dust from one barrel lid thoughtfully. "My grandmother said full stores help people sleep deeper," she murmurs. Then she smiles faintly. She also said never trust thin soup or cheerful tax collectors. Excellent wisdom all around. You climb upstairs again while the travellers prepare slowly for departure. Cloaks are shaken free of ash and straw. bread wrapped for the road, little packets of dried apples tucked into satchels beside prayer beads and wool gloves. The tawny dog sits hopefully beside each traveller in turn, clearly expecting emotional farewells and additional sausages. Outside, sunlight finally breaks weakly through the clouds for the first time in days. Snow glitters across the fields beyond the village in pale silver light. Bare trees stand motionless against the bright winter sky. The world feels hushed, softened, as though the storm exhausted even the landscape. You begin walking again near midday once the roads become passable enough for careful travel. Boots crunch through packed snow while distant crows wheel, slowly above frozen hedgerows. The pilgrims move quietly now, not from sadness exactly, more from that strange calm which arrives after hardship passes. Along the roadside you notice smoke rising from cottages where families prepare winter meals from carefully tended stores. Somewhere onions simmer in broth, somewhere cabbage softens beside salted pork, somewhere children eat dried apples while snow slides gently from the roof outside. Simple scenes, ordinary scenes, yet each one depends upon knowledge gathered patiently across generations. How to dry grain before rain, how to seal barrels against damp, how to smoke fish slowly enough, how to bury roots beneath straw, how to carry summer into winter. The bells from the distant monastery drift faintly across the frozen fields once more, softer now with distance. You remember the granary's iron quay, the smokehouse beside the river, barrels sleeping underground, pilgrims sharing hard bread beside snowy roads, monks counting beans by candlelight, women turning drying peas before frost, thousands of tiny acts, quiet acts, human acts. The tawny dog trots ahead along the snowy road before pausing to look back at you briefly, breath steaming pale in the cold air. Then he continues onward toward the next patch of warmth, the next kitchen fire, the next hopeful smell of bread. And somehow that feels fitting, because this long medieval world has never truly been built by kings alone or armies or castles rising above the hills. It has been built by ordinary people learning, slowly and stubbornly, how to make nourishment remain, how to hold abundance a little longer, how to survive dark seasons without surrendering entirely to fear. The afternoon light fades gently toward evening as you walk on through the winter landscape. Snow muffles the roads, smoke curls lazily from distant chimneys, bells drift across the cold air like soft memories, and gradually the world itself seems to grow quieter. The fields dim, the road softens, the cold no longer bites quite so sharply. You imagine warm hearths glowing behind shuttered windows all across the countryside now, families gathered close beside fires, stew simmering slowly, barrels resting safely below floorboards, bread cooling beneath linen cloths, small islands of warmth against the winter dark. The wind settles completely at last. The sky deepens toward blue-grey dusk, and somewhere far behind you, beneath stone monasteries, timber granaries, smoky cottages, and old roadside inns, preserved food waits patiently in darkness still, holding back hunger, holding together households, holding human life gently through the longest nights of the year. Sleep comes easier in a world where the cellar is full. The bells fade, the snow falls softly again, and the medieval night closes warm and quiet around you at last.